breathing exercise.
So we'll do a brief meditation. You are aware of how to do breathing exercise initially.
다 준대 데스 kom나야 왜 준대로 당보 당보 치 스스 가래 통고이나로 항에 단데 메도시 통고도 메도디 유카레 녜녜랭 유카레 렌지시인 카레 데스마지 땅로 치 저런저 가르 통받지 엔드네 나게 스스 당연히 디지를 삼다로 먼저 디지사데 네셈 류 되어요야라야 아니 지 튼게 가르 거고 유미 다저 계시셔도 셈바 셈라 디요야라 아니 셈 상보 지야당 아니 지금 감다 마치야당 아니 직배 계시셔도 가서 그래 직 가드위네 수수자 좀 보쇼 지야 되게 동해 연구도 하면서
Okay.
다 데이터로 다 신데스 개침벌에 삼삼로 데스 마스 스탄토비나 아니 신기 디둘라 데 삼로디 용거로 신기 디둘라 삼로 요나 아니 디기 용거다 시마셔다 가고래 제다도 곰데스 잡더라
So it would be good if we did a reflection on causality, cause and effect. There's an outer level and an inner level. So, for example, on an outer level, I'm looking at this flower and I'm thinking, so what's the primary cause of the flower and what are the cooperative cause and conditions of it, those two levels? More importantly, on the inner level, we're first looking at our bodies. What is the cause of well-being of body? And more importantly, what is the cause of mental happiness? Mental happiness really comes down to kindness and having a kind disposition, having a lack of worry. That's very important for one's mental happiness. And in this context, the cause of mental happiness is to have a less sense of self-importance. When we hold I as being the most important, we tend to suffer. But if we can set that aside for a moment and think on others' welfare, on others' mental well-being or lack of, others being more important, then there's a chance for our own mental well-being. Aside from that, it's difficult.
아야. 다들 ranzoge nichi 동해 강에 망보지 수미지 남도 되네 대 자와디 아니 몽골라 되네 용디기 요러스와 몽바 제가 좀 된대지 바고 유고 준시에 도나라 근데 송도 동바시와 겨와 매베스 미시반에 도와 참죠 대다 투징의 왜 탑주지 리바자다지는 두바제스 동바시와 겨와 동바니 남다 고섬기 남다 동바니 남샤디 미시베 엉기 아니 먼저 차단 모섬기 차단 모섬 엉기 아니 동에나서 버진요 야도도도 스코어 잡제 아니 도와 코알라야 참야데 두스체네다 참되기 요레스 근데 인자 아니 좀 된대지 네 동에게 자와 디모데제 마리보토지 탑라 인디 리베남단 타여베 코네 아니 텐중 텐제 남샤데 송브레스 인디 송다
When we come to contemplate the fact that we suffer mentally, mental displeasure, we can see it is coming from thoughts which are not valid, thoughts of inappropriate attention. They themselves are rooted or sourced in this ignorance or confusion. And as was stated in Sutra, due to beings being ignorant or unaware of emptiness, pacification, and production, and suffering as a result, Lord Buddha set forth an ocean or limitless reasons to stop that ignorance of being aware of those three modes. So what this is talking about is the cause of sentient beings suffering in cyclic existence is because they are unaware of emptiness, the nature of phenomena being pacified and their production. So therefore, the root of all the suffering of sentient beings in samsara comes back to ignorance grasping at true existence. Having seen this, Lord Buddha set forth limitless numbers of reasons teaching dependent arising.
제단 추나 탐제 귤레 중 디규디 진시외 송세데 아니 최 탐제 규단 젠라데네 총어레서 당고부 탐제 서로와 덴데 남샤 송와데다 바나 콜로 당보 좀 된데지 아니 최 당보 덴바시 송에 내가들라 덴데 균데게 덴데 송어라 제가 지글직 덴네 총어라 따딩고에 내주레데로 ang고에 내주 ngoye nezu da tumba chadegi yore aranzu semdegi ngoye nezu da mitin banyi ji ya samle nana shaje ane de namdo dhamma ju kije ro tang aranzu da sebu do da le dongbanyi da phalte shaje le nezu tanda zambulingi nezu ine ngone de member zuma mangbo ji langanzu go khoje ro sanju du manja zumegan zumaja sanju thangbo shenyi ro ji nyunyu re do 수수직 비즈니스다 계획하고 찹시단 되어요 산주망무지 찹시단 되어요 아니 수수 다 간시 간 산주 직 산주 오마된 거죠 라고면도 아 산주 오마들아 갖고 쉬어지래도 제가 다도 락바래 텔레마 타르도나 준대가 남샤데 하장 텔레장 타와 차도 제가 콜로 당변에 가서 전화 탐제 귤레 중 디주디 신시베 송세야 덴데 균데 덴데 남샤데 송레 다데 아니 체데 다 균데 남샤데라 데네 아니 지 당기 셰브나시레 드링게 네 수술룡하게 자왈 데네 산인기 디둘라 떠요 체데게 네 수술 룡하게 자와 개와다 저 셈디 장주 셈다 동만이다 균데 덴데다 덴데가나 삼로 단제 데토이나 에시갈라버데라 셈바데 파벼보지다 야고지 용야 교와 치마데이나 chanju sim gomje ani shibina ani jawachima milu tobu ya karsana milu di gewe ani de member che shigalawa dele ani thado da ngaje da ngamda da nge pesha mangbo shibjil haru do sam sena da tende ge china ani chi tundu da nyawa da ida da de member la gewa lingi yo de 두스제는 누구여로 하셔서 디인디에 체치마세야 되라 균제가 남셔야 돼 야고질려나 체치면 남셔신 그래 체치면 남셔야 돼 야고진 예신이인데 네 체치마 다 단단한 저네 중문시디게 저자 체델레신 추범이 성도 어디 디 코된데 겨왕아지던 균제가 남셔야 돼 코된데 마샤나나 아니 직디 돈다데 라초 말에 체델레신 추범이 성도 어디다
So coming back to this teaching on dependent arising or causality that was taught, set forth by the Buddha when he uttered the statement that all things come into being due to causes and conditions. This was taught by the Tathagata, and their cessation was also taught by the great renunciate. So just when we look at the first level of causality, dependent arising, in terms of Dharma, we can think on that grosser level of causality, cause and effect. In fact, was the first teaching that Buddha gave when he taught the Four Noble Truths, was that teaching on behavioral cause and effect. It is a reality that was taught. But we have these thoughts that are contrary to that reality. We think in a manner that's contrary to that teaching of reality of causality, and leave alone just understanding emptiness, right? We believe these other things in the world. So that means we are further from the truth. We don't get reality because we hear all sorts of news, but we don't get to the real news. We hear news about business, politics, countries, whatever, and these are like there's a lot of lies. Now, coming back to the law of behavioral cause and effect, this is just the gross level of the law of dependent origination when you start, but it becomes much more subtle than that. So coming back to that gross level of dependent arising, it's important that we start from an understanding of that gross level of behavioral cause and effect. Why? Because, as was mentioned, today's body and speech, if they can be in accord with that grosser level of dependent arising, then tomorrow will follow likewise. And this life's physical and verbal actions, if they're done out of valid states of mind, such as altruism and understanding dependent arising, then the time of death will be good and the future lives will be good. So, for example, at the time of death, if we have thoughts of others' well-being, of altruism, good thoughts, kind thoughts, then we will have, again, a human birth in the next life, the human birth in the next life being a result of that virtuous state of mind we generated at death. Conversely, if our minds are filled with jealousy, worry, thoughts around money, miserliness at the time of death, then those negative states of mind create the cause for difficult births, difficult rebirths, unfortunate migrations that could be hell being, craving goes to animal. So in that sense, then it's good for us to understand in terms of that first level of dependent arising, the law of behavioral cause and effect, so that if this life we are acting in accordance with that, future lives will be good. Now, this brings us to the first line of the 4 lines of parting from the 4 attachments. If you cling to this life, you're not a Dharma practitioner. So we're approaching it from that understanding of behavioral cause and effect.
다 shung무시디다 마 님도 전에 야설 페지 세델라 신나 초미라와 저는 세데세야데 세데 코나라서 그러다 세데 신바 세데를 신사야데 세데게 다또그담 디지골 삼단데와 아니 가서 텨봐 롭존 치해줘라 롭존 치해데 세데게 와어 롭존 치해나 알아라야 냐디 지메 밀바시 네 배샤주스 네 배샤 먹었어 딩아라 세데라 강바야 부시잡 딘데 삼단데비나 롭존 치야 텨바 치야디 세데르레 아니 삼바 치야디 곰자야디 삼다야디 녜두 세제다지 초 삼바디 밀바시 니셰니야 배샤스 아야딩아 세디가 더고지 야면은 담야 고용야 아닌다야 고용야 아니야 지 코르망 고용야 딘데 삼다는 세데로 안데네 곰바라 곰자야디 곰자비나 미질 쇼 업체고스다 나로와 아니게 바왕공고스다 로와 게다 첨부 소고스다 안데 삼다는 최선 곰소이네 아니 세디간을 쳐를 도요 말와 제가 두세 세딜라 신나세야디 신세야디 세디 지고 그 삼단데 비나세 람나 페진 코데브레다
So this first line, if you cling to this life, you're not a Dharma practitioner. This word, just clinging to this life, we need to understand that. So that would mean that if everything one does is just for the purpose of this life, be it getting clothes, food, fame, reputation, all of that. If you do that just clinging to this life, one is not a Dharma practitioner. Moreover, when it comes to Dharma study itself, if you were to study thinking that if I study I'll be able to teach and get money or property or a house, that would be clinging to this life's purpose. And also thinking that if you meditate, the results of your meditation will be such that you'll be able to teach, get money, and have a good name in this life or a good retinue. Or by meditating, you'll be able to show off that you're a good meditator and be famous in that regard. So here, one's hearing and reflecting in meditation, if it's done with that attitude of just clinging to this life, that's what this line means. We can approach it like that.
식디 누가 전부도와 세딜라신 초와 민스디 수중에 뒤gün 수중아 초바 인팅겨와 마 초바 인스디 세딜라신 초와 마르다스 당아 초바 인사 마르다 로 아니 세디 삼로 가지고 당거도 다다 식디 누가 전부 쉬어지래도 알아
This first line is so powerful because it says if you cling to this life you're not a Dharma practitioner. And we think we are Dharma practitioners, but then we might go, if I'm clinging to this life, am I really a practitioner?
다이나야 삼로단다 단다디 지디나라 람링기 교충의 그 총고 상마디나 뒤로고요다 교충의 그 총고 다신이 된 죄도서 또 두모에 람로와다 네 텐조된지 치워미다와 아니 년도동의 삼바 아니 잠도 레준의 삼바 디제디 단다디 세델레션의 초함에 인사되나라 람랭기 기부 중국 중고 디제디 되나라 뒤도고요 레스로
So that first line, if you cling to this life, one is not a spiritual, one is not a Dharma practitioner, is in terms of the Lam Rim, the initial scope, purpose or focus that first one would have relied on the guru, the spiritual friend, correctly, contemplated perfect human rebirth in its rarity and import, and death and impermanence, and the possibility of unfortunate rebirths, and the advice around the causality, behavioral cause and effect. All of that is subsumed within the refuge. all of that is subsumed within this first line of initial scope.
다나 세델라신의 처음에 다 처바 차야라 아니 samlo khartang gore sta ngozo ta de thiwa de len korwa ta na choba chiya la samlo khartang gore
No. Now the big question comes: what actually makes a Dharma practitioner? What qualifies one to be?
ta dindesre ta chedi ngozo lu choya dang ngozo mi lu den de ne pe za chen bo re wa nye wa ka wa xin nye na tuen che ba chi tu mi lu den tinde ji re ta de chu su de man do ya di energy lu de den la ya ne chi chö dum na du tu ya se de la san je go ma tu na du tu ya ni wa yo wa ding e de chu su zi man do wa che di ne ge wa chi ma la ya ji ge wa chi ma ngon nge zong la ma je wa che mi lu den da ra yang ge ji len tu wa chi ya re ya me na de ge de na be shen ben ge chi som mang bo ji du tu yo yin zang
Okay.
che zang ge lu den de ni shen ge tanda du ya dang ge wa chi ma ani ji ngon da la mi go ma du ya ge che du ani nge da lu den de ya go cho wa chi ge de ji de lu je ji ge kala sa ge ne sam da na chul du go da
Okay.
언제 내가 지구에 가지고 거다 로 다디 사무단단 라래 거라
That is the mental attitude. So therefore, what's being said in the context of this life, this body, being human, is that it is important. We have got it. It is difficult to find, and it has great meaning. The point is being made to not waste the perfect human rebirth. And how does one do that? In the context of perfect human rebirth, would mean to practice Buddha Dharma with that eye, or the purpose, or the eye focused on the Buddhahood. So therefore, just on the initial level of future lives, what would it mean to not waste this life? Okay, so here it would mean that one is going to do these things of exercising, eating, but one is going to do it with the motivation that in the future one again will have a human body, get a good body, and one will not want to take an unfortunate migration. That's one way we can motivate, make this life meaningful. Or we can think, I'm going to sustain this body with food, clothes, and so forth, exercise and eat, with the thought to benefit others. With the thought to benefit others. And in that sense, that's what it means to turn the mind to Dharma.
용조 말람 얘기와
Yeah.
로첼로 도쇼 얘기와
That
어디다 로첼로 도쇼 사디 세델레신 처음인 사디 로첼로 도쇼 사디기 군이 디젠지 거
And when, not clinging to this life, there's this saying, isn't it? May my mind become Dharma. May my mind turn to Dharma. That is the meaning here.
다디 로첼로 컨데 스토그레 라윈디 아니 단다 세대당 치마니 나네 세대라 신시디 세대지고 그 상로당 많이 버체 세대 된치야디 치마야 원용야 치등에 지기인 상로다나 세대기 내가 치야 로왕조 둘로마고나나 아니 차시티 나 통도라 칼라마스나나 수부서도고 말아봐 딘데 치디네 칼라사기에 둘로 공구에 아니 루고 트된 치기에 다심 곰자야디 아니 치마야고 지금 해야지디 아니 인삼배 전에 제비나 다 쳐려 누구였다.
How then does the mind become Dharma? Well, there is this life and future lives. So not solely clinging to just this life, but with an eye to future lives, thinking that one will take care of oneself, thinking of that future life. So for example, when you do these things such as wear enough clothes so that you won't get cold, have a good diet so that you won't get sick, you're doing it with the thought of future lives as well. to take care of that. And to take care in the sense that, again, you will be human. And when you meditate, it is likewise.
제가 다데야 추 체데라 로출로 줘야기 탑란야쇼 가다는 미다보고 미야 단단다 먼저 람림나라 미다보고 미야요 미다보고 미야들 미다발라 아니 미다보 라보고 인지미지 미다보 탐고 말단데 먼저 로출로 줘야기 미다보들 라바 레라버레 시왕이 남진예메레 아치베세 최마도 강의견 핑면도 세대 다신다 삼로몽보지 자오숨 균제구 타제와 숨다 아니 치와 트베 팽 치와 마트베 님이 도저레르 삼단도나다 아니 야고여르델레 딘데 마제나나 자오숨디 삼마 야고다나 다게베데 베 셈나라 문에직베 뒤중안저 자신부 지대야 개신부 지대야서 다 딘데로 지레섬 남사마 셈디 직클로야다 뒤중안저 시부직 자신부 지제베 개신부로 시부직 지대야죠로다 어디제데네 자오숨디 치왕에 남징에메레다 당에 단다 시부 자신부 지야디 아니 치료도 편도도 해서는 편도면도 다다 딘데 레셔서 아니 콜시라야 야스케면도 그래서 어디 치워미다 보고 해야 되다 로출로도에 탑랑 약쇼데레스와
What then would be the best method to make the mind Dharma, so that one's practice becomes Dharma? The superior method is to meditate on death and impermanence. Here, to reflect on one's death. Death and impermanence, there are gross and subtle levels of it. We don't need to go into the subtle levels, just the gross level of one's own impermanence, thinking of those three roots, that we are definitely going to die, but that the time the death will come is not certain, and finally, the only thing that matters at that death time is your spiritual insight. So let alone go into these three roots, 3 reasons and 3 conclusions, the ninefold reasoning. Just bearing in mind these 3 roots is very precious. Because if you can do that, then you're adjusting your attitude. So then you would think that the things that are important to you now, you check. You do a double check and you think, is that really important at the time of death? Will this thing that I am fixating on now be that important or not? Will it really affect? So therefore, there is that kind of relaxing, a more spaciousness.
다 두성단도 먼저 제단 체대강게 아니 차샤라 니 삼로단단지기다 고 두고여봐 저런데도 니 다지기 자대니 좀 세세져라 자대 먼저 다지기 아우 리고니 세세요 다지기가 배배담라 인질라 다지기 자대니 좀 세. 냐니 좀 세. 와 자와지기 내가 니 좀 지대. 나 체대기 자와지야 돼. 꿀론지기 겨워치마 편지라 출로도 돼야지. 이제 삼단단디 요레스티 당신나 삼단신나 아니고 수수 간체와디 출로도 해야지. 아니 자와 요르와고.
It becomes a mental attitude so that whatever one does, it becomes Dharma. In your country, you have the saying of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Perhaps in Tibet, we would kill 2 rabbits. But certainly, it is attitudinal. So what you're doing is you are grounded in this life, but your focus is also future lives. So you are fulfilling the 2 purposes with the 1 action, 2-fold attitude.
다드네 는 단당아 내가 지야디 단다 겨치마 밀리트 외치디 네 겨치기 삼나 아니 다 철로 도송 다드네 대자마인 바 밀리데 토바이네 다 닝보스 케민도로와 이제 코와 도와들 닝보스 케민도스와 코와들 타베 타와 토고도 대치디 아니 타와토 외치디에 겨치기 타와치 외치디 류덴디 야고지냐기 세상다나이나 네스스 겨와체와디 타와 타베줄로 두고 열어.
So one's work, one can work for, the motivation of another good human rebirth in the future. That's one level. But even having considered that, it is subject to change. There's no essence to the fact that, again, you will be human, because that lack of essence is the nature of cyclic existence, the samsara. So therefore, you can practice in this life with a view to being liberated in future lives from samsara, and if all the virtues you do become the cause of that, and the cause of a perfect human rebirth within that motivation as well.
다드네 라니 코발라 타는 나란 직보 돈다래셔다. 수수 직보 코발라 타는 되면도 와 동해들에 타는 데 수수 거든 진지. 근데 세디가 파마니 조지에 심지 탐제네 동해냥게도 수수 거든 진이 미도서 동해냥데도. 도저에 다지. 네 직 코발라 타와다 동해면요 지고도 데이터와 제야 누가네 수소면도 다디 누가데 저거 산제도 대지 동해 산제 고마토와시 대지. 네 산제게 류된 산제야게 네 지 누가 여디니 밀류된도 아니 밀류된딩에 네 다고야 고지 잡제 산제 고마 주거 지기 상담나 개와 간체와다 수수 두중기 류가게 자와 간체와도 상 아니 잔주심이 줄어도야 티버점에 줄어도 여러스라
But the motivation of being liberated from the unenlightened premise of samsara, uncontrolled birth, aging, sickness, and death, just for oneself, would be not enough. Because what about other sentient beings who are also in that predicament? One's kind parents and associates, friends are also suffering likewise. They also need the mode of liberation from cyclic existence. So there you take the thought further, and you think, for the benefit of self and others, the only way to reverse those suffering predicaments is to become a Buddha. So one uses one's perfect human rebirth with that goal of full enlightenment. Why? Because the best basis upon which you could attain that state of Buddhahood is the human body. So therefore you think, I will sustain this body for the benefit of others so that I can become a Buddha. And then that is the great vehicle motivation, the altruistic motivation. No.
제가 다 두상당데 딩안도 수수응원에다 치투바들어 세대 중간에 겨워치말라야다 지 밀리토야기 딩즈요 가지 저거 여러다
Okay.
다데 딩즈디 요 말바다 딩즈 두게 민도 알아 나 겨워치면 면하다 약셔래로 세대 집상 단데네 데님 겨워치마사데 요데 미금 망부직 딩사 겨왕하면 튕기도 알아 겨왕하면 튕기요사 겨워치마 요다 룹투고 여러 거네 주리 겨워치면 면하다 네 세대 수수 집상 단제 대신 디도 집상 가지고라다 이나에다 겨워치마 요네 요 타저래 네 제가 아니 제가 겨워치마 되라 아니 년돌을 미지베 딩즈 요다메 타요 말봐 딩즈 요나다 약셔로 봐다 다 데레 교베 뉴버디 술라 삼다인데 네 디뉴버디 다 군조숨나도 로 호라 지 코당에 송그 동에레 대드 녀지를 잡된 거라면서 지금 코알 동에 고에날 내된 조직이 네 코알야 대 뉴버 연구 말아 봐셔다 제가 저러면지 신행년도 미지 땡미지 디지 조 군조숨딩에 송도 하셔다 다 신에 아니 년도를 미지베 땡저 요 말아 봐 딜레 교베 뉴버디 네 군조숨나도 제가 대시되네 점도 치긴 해야 돼 도 삼로 스타네 네 용구요르다 삼마다나 용구요 말바데
So then one comes to contemplate the future lives in the context of this life. And is there kind of like a guarantee one will not take a difficult rebirth? Well, of course, prior to that, one would have to have reflected on the possibility of future lives or not. So that question does come, doesn't it? But what we come to see recently is that there are, experiences that validate past and future lives. So coming back to working on the premise that future lives do exist, we would reflect on this guarantee. Is it definite that we might not take a difficult rebirth or not? Well, no, there's no guarantee there. So there has to be kind of like a valid source to afford protection from that potential difficult rebirth. Well, the only valid source we could rely on is a being or the circumstance that's already out of that predicament, completely free of it, and that could lead us to be so. As Lama Tsongkhapa states in his condensed Lam Rim, there's no guarantee that at the time of death one will not take a miserable rebirth, and having conviction in that, one follows refuge in the three jewels.
Chazandanda di lamrina la chamdo jela lende songdo. Tikarasana nyamlen rangrim bardo, nyamlen. Ta chazan ni shine ngendo meji dingyo mar. So junde samdang di tanga shiwa ngensha. Namji ngeme resha. Ta chidu kawa dusare rwa. Samdang di tanga rang milu denshi topsare sang. So ta kara sajar kiwa chima di sajara waji kawa dugoyo me di tenge yo mar. Ta suzila tanda dodo shena rwa. 말아서 공생을 두고 있나 공생도에 사자데 하고요 말다 가와 두고 있네 되네 사자 야월리 그 두자리 담을 리그라 지고려 대다 지고지 야로 제가 티인도에 다 들려줘에 누워도 군조선을 여와시 또 군조선라 겹 제법 싸움게를 뭐도 수수게 다 능하게 자와 수수게 개와체나 된돌게야 매개 외시는 연도제야시 제가 랜데가 남샤데 ni yagoji nyamlen chego yeresha jamdo jila lende gnam sha songwa de lamri nande nyamlen gren ba zore da nyamlen nyamslen zang gren ba
in the Lam Rim, it is directly after having taken refuge, the teaching comes about the law of behavioral cause and effect. And that's very much in line with reflecting on one's own death. Isn't it? The reality is that in terms of the future lives and the law of behavioral cause and effect, there's no guarantee. It's not sure where we will go. We're going on a holiday. We're going somewhere. It's really not sure where we will end up. We could go up. We could go down. It's like that, isn't it? But only by relying on the valid sources of direction, safe direction, Buddha Dharma, the three rare sublime ones, one can come to see that if the actions in this life, physically and verbally, are good, we can hope for, and mentally we can hope for an upper rebirth. If not, lower rebirth is there. Which is why after the essence of refuge, after refuge is the teaching on behavioral cause and effect, karma.
다데네 jamdo khodenyago chawala ya ani dinshi namsha다 야 군대가 남샤 렌데 남샤도 저 khoden chaw이나 ani jamdo yago yala pendo 용고야 다데
Now, but for your refuge, for your sense of valid direction to be firm, you need to understand the four truths and causality within that.
예전 단다디 디송도 전화 담지 줄려죠 디주디지 줄로 거고 칸인 바스라도 다 줄로 거고 칸인 바스라윈디 거기행고스데 남제 슐레 된 거로 다 제산 줄라스데 먼저 만나저게 디도 동해 망보시지 용돼야 돼라 주미지 남도르디네 총을 해서 레도 안아서 얘기 삼노단다다 만데 동해 연구도 하다 그러 이거서 저도 가시 나기도 안 해망아 춘주간라 동해 시라메 기부셔져요스 야 로처르데 기부쳐는 면도스 라고도 가르쳐는 라고 그래 춘주간라 먼저 심 닫아와 간라 대두고요 먼저 삼주 튕주시라 요 말은 먼저 대외 상몽부 땅 말은 망부시라 와리 지금 말 대외시라 다다 수습에 인조 시우치로 다고 시에 타고 도고 있는 볼레제가 도고 있는 취재가 배 다다외 그 자와디 간라 배대 인시우 요로고
Yeah.
지금 심디 다다와 간라 시우치 되게 요인다 아니 기부 요로다 다야 로치모 차도 아니 다 대외에 망해 된데 채소 뺏사서 땅아 마음바데데 연구도 아니 야대 신제체로도 아니 미주저지 이제 발라발라발라 많이니니 발라발라 로충어도 주도시라 지금도 알아 미 주도시라 지금 알아 스스스스 인조체다 대샤고 기부여래 먼저 로체를 주도네 바바바 주도지 주도지는 되네 아니 세베데 데데라 계제세도 미 삼당으로 데 삼당마를 당데 아니 대마지버차 아니 오링다 아니 탁시 파지니 파데네 나절 담을 레용고다다 제가 다대외 간에 대두고야 맞다 근데 엘레 신다 파제 동번이지다 또 파샤시더라 심 다대외 간에 대야 로체르도 두고요 제가 로체르도 동이 망아에 베서지 여데 말에 수수심디 담을 땅사라디 티 남도디 담을 육디 되네 델레데네 데우 담을 연데기 요라 디레도
So in that context then of needing to understand refuge or strengthening one's refuge by understanding the four truths and the law of karma, behavioral cause and effect, we come back to this quote that, all things come into being due to cause and conditions was taught. This is what the Tathagata said. And the cessation of such things and events was also taught by the great renunciate. Here, we need to pay heed to the cessation. The cessation of these things is highlighted first rather than the path to that cessation because there's a way out of it. There's a way out of it. The fact that everything we experience, pleasure or pain, in the sense of our feelings, is coming from these mental constructs, these thoughts. It's mental, isn't it? These thoughts that we have that can often be non-valid. Now, when we are young in that regard, we are so happy in general. We are free, easygoing. But as we get older, we tend to have more thoughts, more responsibilities, more worries, less happiness is there. When we're young, that is the case because we're able to really remain much more in the present moment, coming back to this idea of having lots of thoughts. We are younger, not thinking so much about the future or worried about the past. We would play, watch movies, play with balls, whatever, play games. So keen we were to be in the present moment. But somehow, as we get older, we start regretting what we didn't do, maybe, or having worries about the past and revolving things around the future, what we're going to do. And then the mind starts going, 1, 2, 3, they said this, they said that, or they said this, and then I believe that. You get into this kind of dialogue. And then taking that further, it affects your health. You start to breathe less. You are sighing all the time. It can affect your blood pressure and diabetes. So let alone even talk about emptiness, just talking about these mental thoughts and reducing them.
제가 다디 기부충의 충고디 체딜라시는 처음에 사디나라 기부충의 충고 사단디나라 도샤바다 뒤송아
Right, so now we should come back to this first line. If you cling to this life, you are not a Dharma practitioner. Understand that is covering the topics of the initial scope we've been through.
기부충의 사디 겨워치만 온들함이 고만 텐데니 대시도 에네 잠들라서 최념내 진이들라 아니 기부충을 라고요.
Now remember, the purpose, the focus, the goal of the initial scope practitioner is again to secure in the future life a human birth or a birth of a high form. Now, in order to do that, one has to take refuge and follow the advice of refuge causality.
다 딘데서만 다운데 안능아서 뇌기 직된데라 직된지 감숨스 된 감수 감숨에 감수 뇌 직된데라 수 감숨 아니 주의 semjedela 아니 도와릭 툭 쓰러와 단당아서 미체 튼도 통거도 안데네 상다나 미마이 지 냐와이다 튼도 라마이다 드제데 지 야야야 네제르시나 신야 요래 당아서 마신조 망보지 요르메시지로와 아니 주의 semjedela 도와릭 툭 뇌이 직된데라 아니 뇌주 직된 감숨라와 뇌감 수감 수메감 다 뇌감 사야데 저 뇌영알아야 다 뇌영알아야 착바체지 대베 내들라 뇌감세오래 뇌영하다 착바다 대네 수글라지고 지기 딘데기 지다 먼저 감세라고 할라 뇌 먹어 시제 대니기 되진라 수감 다데 대자마인 바데 사제기 대와스나레 다이 삼로데 베데진 대야 동해 계제주데 아니 베데 지기 이지고라 수글라 뇌 수글라고 할라 뇌 먹어 되니기 네 지기 수미 감시제 다 딘데기 이기 이로게 다지 신감로 짠짠 차지 된저로 이로 짠짠기 파즈 네엑소로 지려야다 숨미 감신라고 하다데 만아도 니람나라 지 용되기도 하디서로 때 딜레 장 타와 니람나라 수요로 갖고 니람나라 먼저 수요로 딜레 장 타와 지게 네지 다 디자인로 지라 숨미 치제 감숨세데 어디 다 두스chen 총레스 자고 요레스로 다 두스 상모 요야디 레다 레다 아니 뇨모라 되네 총 레다 뇨모라 되네 총 제단 레다 뇨모 남도레 레다 뇨모 남도레 대다 줄레 뚜바 니세야디 사와시라 키로 어다디 동해 덴바 아니 군준 덴바 코웨 쪽베 덴바디 두스체네 아니 샤게 요레스다
So then understanding the world we are in, that is made up of, then the question comes, how do the worlds and the beings that inhabit the worlds come to be? The world we are in is made up of three realms: desire, form, and formless realms. And within that constraint are the 6 types of migratory beings. Humans and animals we can see with our eyes, but there are so many types of sentient beings we can't conceive of that we don't see. So we're talking about the vessel and the contents of the vessel being the world or these realms, and the content like beings that inhabit those realms. So in the first one, the desire realm, made up of 5 types of beings, they are under the constraints of the 5 senses, hence the word desire realm beings, subject to that constraint. Then seeing the gross attributes of such clinging to such senses, the next level, the form realm, is more subtle than that. It is more concentrated. And then even more subtle than that is a realm where form is almost completely non-existent. And the realm is just mental. One is dwelling in a mental state without physical form. This is very subtle. We often dream, and we have like a dream body, and some of these formless realms are even more subtle than that. Now, when we come to look at the source of all of these realms and the beings therein, we come to see that they are a product of karma and disturbing emotions. Right, so mental volitions and disturbing thought aspirations. So therefore, when we reflect on Nagarjuna's verse, in light of the 4 truths, here cease karma and disturbing emotions. Karma and disturbing emotions come from thoughts. Thoughts arise from elaborations of true existence. These in turn cease in emptiness. So we are looking at the cessation of the mental constructs which cause the karma and delusions. So therefore, you start to look at the 4 truths. No.
가리 있는 당연한지 반나단다 다 인공 칼라서 그러 봐. 칼라서야지. 말한 두고 자치도 인에 수고야고 차이 뒤sam담에 됩체.
Yeah.
nge me semje shen ye diduk duba chigi ma semje shen la shabji shunyi chi deji de nge lu de chogo yin deji de nga khala sa yin samna ane khala sa ya de shenbe chamju la shenbe nge da chö su da chö ngune le dogo yor da shinda da chi chö nyamlen che da she mo go ro da kan da je
Okay, okay. Dear lie, right?
mm
So now, just the simple act of eating a meal, if you eat a meal to be satiated, to fill the body and think kind of you're replete, but I'm eating this meal so that I can sustain the body to help others understand what are the sources of well being and suffering and how to help them understand that, then just the act of eating becomes a good thing. It becomes a beneficial thing. That itself becomes Dharma, let alone going into these other altruistic things that are Dharmic, just that.
oh yeah ne danda konzo online nye yo na konzo din ga la tuwa sha tu go yore bidu ga sha tu go yo ode tuwa sha sro an tan de chu yin che ga la di ga tuwa yo na tuwa sha sha na no zo joran de ti le yin zo na tuwa sha chu ni che ga la ro wa ngo zo tu yun zu de ye tu ling chu yo ro da
So now, as normally we do, those who are online, if you'd like to make a question, put it there online and we'll go through them at 2:30. And the same for those in this room. Please write it down, and when we meet at 2:30, we'll discuss them.
oh yeah da de sha
We will dedicate.
Page 31 for the short mandala.
che me do da re ra le ji ni de jen ba de san je shin de mi de o go go nan da yi la yo nu ra ra ne men de la kam ni ya da ya
Page 33, prayers of dedication.
ge wa di ni de da la ma san je lu je je do je ja ma me wa di san la go sha su na de la je se ba ye ma shi ge da ba da na da je la na de se ve zo le do do sho chen je su je ren bo chen ma je ba na ji
And may that which has
ge wa
arisen
nya ba me wa ya ko ne ko ne be wo re sho
whatever slight positive that just try and hate created by paying homage, offering, and acknowledging my thoughts.